Good Monday, everyone. Welcome to the Rocky Top Rewind podcast brought to you by Blue Water Climate Control. We appreciate you joining us on this Monday. Hope everybody had a great weekend. Don't forget to check out bluewaterclimatecontrol.com or visit Blue Water online at blueh2o_climate. Today, guys, you ever had one of those moments where you remember something as something that was better than what it was? Well, that's this moment for me. I remember this game, the 2002 Arkansas game, 6 overtime deal, as this really cool game, and it had some great moments in it, some disappointing moments in it. And so Austin and I interviewed Casey Clausen about this game, and his interview, by the way, is really good about this game. You'll hear him talk about the broken collarbone he played with, and all of those types of things. But then you rewatch this game in detail, and guys, I picked the dud. This one was not much. The 6 overtimes were interesting, but it was a pretty ugly game leading up to this one. I know, Jesse, it's the first time you've seen it. I'm sure Rob and Austin, you guys hadn't looked at it since it happened either, because it's a pretty forgetful season for Tennessee and a pretty forgetful game. So,
it leads to such a spiral after this game, because Casey's broken collarbone leads into the C.J. Leak debacle at Georgia with James Banks, and then Chris Leak goes to Florida based off of what happened with C.J. I mean, there's a domino effect after this game, so it did play an important part in like how the next few years I think played out for both Florida and Tennessee, because Chris Leak was okay his first couple of years in Gainesville, but he had a really good senior year when he had Tebow running alongside of him. And where would he have been if he had ended up here going forward?
Now, I will say this. I do think Hubbs is shortchanging this game from a unintentional comedy standpoint. From Franklin to some of the calamities in overtime, to Houston Nutt dealing with the kickers, to Randy Sanders calling multiple quarterback draws with a quarterback who has a broken collarbone late. I mean, there's some pretty good unintentional comedy in this game, I think, Rob.
I was going to say, Austin reminded me of this when he mentioned the C.J. Leak debacle at Georgia and everything that transpired. Hubbard, before we get into the game, real quick, can tell the story about Chris Leak that summer, August camp. Kyle Wright, who was the number one quarterback in the country from California, comes all the way across country for an unofficial visit to Tennessee.
I forgot this story. You tell it. You remember it better than I do.
I'll tell it, because Casey just went over it with me on the phone the other day.
Well, I'll set it up. I mean, it was for a couple of years. I mean, it seemed like everybody thought Chris Leak was coming to Tennessee. He's from Charlotte. He's the hot, big time quarterback prospect. His brother transfers in here, and then Tennessee is also recruiting Kyle Wright, who ended up being, at least at the time, was the number one ranked quarterback in the class, all the way from California. Tennessee gets in that one deep. He and his whole family come for an unofficial visit on a weekend during August fall camp, and boom, what happens?
The whole Leak family shows up and stalks around the practice field like they were marking their turf on Kyle Wright while he was in for an unofficial visit.
Casey told the story, Brent, about how the coaching staff came and said, "Hey, we got Kyle Wright coming in. We want to show him love him up." Well, I mean, who else was in that quarterback room with Casey? So, I mean, like, he related it back to the family.
Right.
Next thing you know, boom, as you guys talked about, they just show up unannounced. And Casey said the look on Philip Fulmer's face when the Leaks were marching around right in front of Kyle Wright was just like, there was nothing he could do. But, I mean, he said it was priceless.
Well, and then they obviously end up with neither, but it just kind of shows you some of the drama that was coming from the Leak family. And then whether Tennessee would have gotten Kyle Wright or not, I don't know. But I mean, it was pretty clear after that day that they probably weren't.
Well, the other thing that happened leading – and this Arkansas win was the high water mark of the year for Tennessee. Now, I mean, I'll give Fulmer and his staff some credit. They managed the season with, James Banks at quarterback, who clearly wasn't ready to play quarterback. They win at Mississippi State, and Casey comes back on a bad ankle, a bad foot, and shuts out Vanderbilt. They beat some bad teams down the stretch before getting blown out in the bowl game. But this is also the Kelly Washington famous game day interview, where they interview him in the complex during the week leading up to the game for the Florida game, which Tennessee fumbled 6 times in the rain and couldn't get to snap and all those things. This is the one where Kelly did the interview in sunglasses and talked in third person in the whole interview. And it was so out of character for Tennessee's, for kind of the branding of Tennessee's program. It was way out of character. And it ruffled a lot of people's feathers. I mean, there was a lot of behind-the-scenes drama going on with this football team. This also ushered in and ushered out the wide striped pants, which thankfully those things disappeared as well in the uniform collection. I don't have any use for those things either. Look, we'll talk, briefly about the game here. It's obviously doesn't have a ton of highlights. Tennessee's in complete control in this game. They're going to win in an ugly fashion. They've struggled to run the football. They've struggled to protect. They've had to throw it, out in the flat to Troy Fleming all evening, but they've got the 2-touchdown lead. They give up a score late in the fourth quarter, and then they get the great punt, and Julian Battle, who had moved from safety to corner, decides to turn the kid loose, and all of a sudden you're in a tie football game, and the whole narrative of this game completely changes from that point on. Just reminiscent of BYU, to be honest with you, from earlier.
That's the first thing went through my mind.
Last season, it's like, how do you let a guy get behind you? I had that same thought in the BYU game this past year. I'm like, I hadn't seen that since Julian Battle let a guy get 15 yards behind him for a 92-yard touchdown.
I was thinking Julian Battle, Alante, somebody's like, Alante, how do you let somebody do that? Julian Battle's like, hold my beer.
Yeah, because at least they got the guy tackled to send it into – I mean, this was, 92 yards, and nobody was going to come close to catching him there. Then you get into the overtime deal, and this is – Arkansas had been in that epic overtime game against Ole Miss the previous year. Tennessee had been in the overtime game against Florida in '98, but people are trying to figure out how to manage overtime. And clearly, Jesse, I thought both of these coaches, play callers, were trying to figure out kind of what to do. I mean, they run some stuff that just doesn't make sense. You mentioned the quarterback draws, 2-point plays. We're kind of like, well, what is this? And then Tennessee has, they settle for field goals in 3 of the overtimes, and then they have 2 overtimes that they score on first down when they throw it in the end zone for a wide open touchdown, to Witten to win it. And then obviously the one to Tony Brown. Really interesting because it feels like in rewatching it, a lot of grasping at straws in the overtime from a play calling standpoint.
Yeah. Tennessee's best success offensively in this game, I mean, just writing some stuff down, was always over the middle. Whether it was to Kelly Washington or Witten, they did have a play that I noted in the first half that was hilarious. It just showed it almost like where this game was going because it happened multiple times. They completed this one. They did not complete a couple others. But Tennessee completed this bomb to Kelly Washington when there was 4 guys. 2 Tennessee's receivers ran the same route and were like on top of each other. And there was 2 Arkansas defenders, and that play happened multiple times. I mean, it was you talk about the spacing difference between now football today and what they were doing then. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, Randy Sanders was like, especially in the first couple overtimes, clearly just had no faith in anything because as well as Jabari Davis had run the ball, a lot of that came on that 60-yard touchdown. And so he called a quarterback draw with Casey on like second down, one play. I mean, it was just like he did not know what to do. And Tennessee ended up, thankfully for them, they had the better field goal kicker, and Houston Nutt was basically tanking his own kicker by running him at a bad angle in the third overtime, or else he should have been able to kick a chip shot field goal. Well,
and Tennessee gets fortunate that they have a blocked field goal go over the crossbar, or a partially blocked field goal go over the crossbar, or the game is over there. This is and look, I mean, there was a lot of criticisms about Randy Sanders, and there was a lot of things that Randy Sanders, I think, did really well. This was not a great play calling game. Overall, I think he was a pretty good play caller in his tenure as offensive coordinator. But I think you start to see a little bit here in this season. A lot of it was due to injury, but there's a lack of attention to detail to some stuff, Rob. I mean, you look at the first play in overtime, they run Jonathan Wade out there, and it's literally a train wreck because Jonathan Wade basically tackles Casey Clausen on a jet sweep. And Jesse mentions that there were 2 receivers too close together. There was a little bit of a slip in attention to detail on some stuff that showed up big time in this game and really showed up in that season. Part of that was due to youth and injury. They got it back in 2004 with 2 freshman quarterbacks and had success. But I think that was one of the adjustments and one of the slippages that you saw in Tennessee's program a little bit right there.
I mean, just contrast this. I mean, what we're seeing right here with the last game we watched, the 0-1 Florida game. I mean,
which, by the way, is not a year apart.
Yeah.
If anybody's keeping score at all.
I mean, it's less than a year, and it's just – I mean, it's night and day. And, yeah, I mean, there's some personnel changes. Don't get me wrong, but you got a lot of the same guys back. I mean, you would expect, some more carryover. And I mean, I agree with you completely. I mean, you see just, little things. And, I mean, and this wasn't a little thing, but, I mean, we talked about overtime. They survived Jabari Davis fumbling. I mean, giving away a possession.
How different, though, is this team if Dante Stallworth don't get duped into going pro? You know what I mean? If Dante and Kelly are both there and Kelly don't play the old switcheroo, and I don't even think Jesse knows that story. But if that doesn't happen, how different is this team offensively? And then, you lose 2 big tackles like John and Albert after that 0-1 season. To me, that was a blow, for the football team. And, I mean, they just lost some key pieces off of that 0-1 team that just graduated. They weren't great players, but they were kind of glue pieces.
The O-line in this game was not nearly as good as the year before.
And I was going to say, looking at that offensive line, and, I mean, that's the highlight for me. But if you think about where those guys were as recruits, Munoz, Sean Young, and I know Michael had injury problems. That was part of it. But, Offenhuizen was a good player. But I don't think those guys were huge recruits. Enormous. And I don't think any of those guys lived up to the hype. I mean, obviously, Sean Young flamed out. I don't think, Michael's injuries and Offenhuizen was a good but not great player. And I think that's one area on that team where you saw a drop-off happen. I mean, if those guys had, lived up to the hype or developed, then just a different story with that team.
Yeah, no question. And look, Fred Weary, is a guy that gets injured, and Scott Wells probably not really ready to play at that point, gets thrust into that Florida game that year. I mean, they had a ton of injuries up front. I think from the all joking aside and kind of making fun of, this game being me picking this game and just kind of some of the bizarreness of this game, this is a game that maybe as time has gone on shows what fans should appreciate about Casey Clausen. I remember doing TV the next morning. Was doing a call-in show with Mark Packer, and Heath Schuler was there, Austin. And I'm sitting to Packer's right, and the telephone is to Packer's left. And we're taking live phone calls. And a guy calls in, and I knew Casey was hurt. They did not have – they feared it was a broken collarbone, but they did not have the confirmation of the x-rays back at that point in time on Sunday morning. But the family feared that the collarbone was broken. This guy calls in, and he just eviscerates Casey on the phone. He's a bum, how bad he is. They need to be playing, whoever else, C.J. Leak or whoever else they need to be playing and not playing Casey Clausen. And I just reached over and hung up the phone. I reached across Packer's lap and hung up the phone and just told the guy he was an idiot. And it came out later that day that Casey had played all the overtimes with a broken collarbone. But it's interesting in that December 2001, Casey was a hero. But this is when kind of the a little bit of a change occurred and kind of people's attitudes towards some of the individual players. I mentioned the Kelly Washington deal. But this is, Casey was now suddenly California cool, and fans were suddenly over him, when the reality is he was the glue guy. I mean, he was the guy who got him to compete every week, even though he didn't have all of his best weapons around him. I still contend he's one of the most underappreciated players in the last 25, 30 years of Tennessee football, not because he was the most talented player, but he's one of the best winners that's come through this program, and he made everybody around him better.
I agree, Hubbard. I come at it. I think I have an interesting perspective here because 2002 was my first year covering the team, working with you. 2001, and my perception of Casey Clausen from watching him, just as somebody who watched every Tennessee game in 2001 and then was around him every day in 2002, completely changed. I mean, I'll admit, I probably thought he, came into it thinking he was, did have that kind of California cool persona. But being around him and seeing how his teammates responded to him, that wasn't the case at all. And he was as you alluded to, he was a tough SOB. I mean, he may have looked like Iceman in Top Gun, but he didn't have any of that, prima donna persona. I mean, he was a football player. I mean, he was a guy that his teammates respected because of how tough he was and because of the way he played the game. And that really, again, my perception of him, once getting to see him up close all the time, it did a 180.
And frankly, having talked with Casey several times over the years, one of the nicest guys you could talk to. We'll sit there and just spend countless amount of time with you just talking Tennessee football. He loves to know the latest. He watches from California. He and Rick try to come in every other year to the Florida game. That's almost a dead set thing. Before we go any further, I do want to say, prayers out to Rick's wife, Katie, is they've had the baby and she continues to battle cancer. But I mean, just two good guys. And they kind of got that, that California cool stigma to them, just off of, people kind of, just kind of giving them that label. But I mean, I'm telling you, Casey's one of my favorites. He's as nice a guy to talk to as there is that played here.
Tough. I mean, he was just a tough, hard-nosed guy is what he was. And the bigger the moment, the better he seemed to play. He had a rough year this 02 year, and he talks about that coming up here on the podcast when he'll join us, the injuries he battled and playing through some of the stuff he did and the injuries he had that this team had around. This was by no means his favorite year of playing football at the University of Tennessee. But he was pretty heroic on this night as – he plays most of the second half and all of overtime with a collarbone. You could see that at the end where he didn't want anybody to touch him there. And different deal. I'm not sure in today's world, Jesse, that you let a guy go back out there. I think Jason Witten played this game with a concussion in overtime, which wouldn't happen today. Ken Hamlin wouldn't have played in overtime because he would have been ejected for the hit he laid on Jason Witten that gave him a concussion. Just again, it's about the different times and the different eras of football. But this was a night Tennessee fans will remember where they were because Tennessee tried to give one away and then sort of stole it back. And again, was a highlight in a year where they were they were not very good against ranked opponents and really took a perceived step back following an 0-1 team that should have played for the Rose Bowl in the national championship. So. Again, Casey Clausen coming up, and he'll break down this game, but more importantly, talk about kind of how the overtimes went, what he remembers about it, and all of those things. That's coming up here on the Rocky Top Rewind podcast on this Monday, brought to you by our friends at Blue Water Climate Control. In East Tennessee, you need a reliable heating and air system designed for your home and our climate. You need a team trained to hold you and hold themselves to the highest standards. You need solutions, not sales pitches. There are many heating and air companies in East Tennessee. There's only one name you need to remember, veteran-owned, family-operated. It's Blue Water Climate Control. If you need a new air conditioning system or a major repair, whatever, they're going to send out an expert to tell you what you need, not a salesperson trying to get you to buy what's perceived to be the latest, greatest. So you need somebody to give you all the facts before you make a critical decision about your heating and air system. For more on Blue Water Climate Control, you can call them at 865-299-2290 or visit them online at bluewaterclimatecontrol.com to make an appointment. Blue Water is an authorized dealer for American Standard Heating and Air Conditioning. Casey Clausen coming up next here on the Rocky Top Rewind podcast. Welcome back to the Blue Water Climate Control VolQuest.com podcast with Austin Price. Happy to join us now, Casey Clausen, maybe the winningest coach in SEC or the winningest quarterback in SEC play in Tennessee history. We're just one game lost, right, Casey, in the regular season, one road game?
Yeah, that was at Auburn. That was a rough night.
Hey, you made a big rally that night. You made a big rally that night. Gave yourself a chance to come back and win, right?
Yeah, we had a chance at the end. How you guys doing?
I'm good, man. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you taking the time. We're going to talk about maybe not the most popular game or the most historic game or the prettiest game in history, but that's the 2002 Arkansas game. Casey, I picked this game because it's the 6 overtime thriller, and your story that night was a pretty remarkable one when you got to the end. What do you remember? Let's talk pre-overtime. What do you remember about that game?
Yeah, that was by far probably one of the most physical games I've ever been a part of. Arkansas was really, really good. Defensively, especially. They had Matt Jones at that time run all over the field, which gave our defense a challenge defensively. But, yeah, it was a back-and-forth game, not a lot of points scored. We had a hard time doing anything, running it or throwing it. They pretty much put, I think his name was Ahmad Carroll on Kelly, and they doubled up Jason, and they said, run the ball or throw the ball to somebody else. So it was a tough night that night for us offensively.
Casey, when you look back at that game, obviously, as you noted, not a pretty game early on, but you get to the fourth quarter, then the fireworks start to fly a little bit. Was there a moment for both sides that you guys, because you had not been great up to that point, then all of a sudden you're able to make some plays?
Yeah, I think it finally opened up where we did hit a couple of plays and then we got up on them. I think early in the fourth or maybe end of the third, then they made a couple of plays, and I think they scored with a minute 50 or 2 minutes left to go in the game late. We actually had them pinned down, and which sent it into overtime, and that's when everything it was back and forth pretty much. It was a wild game.
Well, you mentioned the late play. It was a 92-yard pass that the defense gave up to tie that game, to send it into overtime. What's the mentality at that point? It's been a long night. It's been a frustrating night offensively, but everything looks like you're going to hang on for the win and get out of there and, quote, an ugly game 17-10, something like that. It turns into 41-38. What's the mentality as regulation ends, Casey, and you got the pressure mounts for what overtime life is like? What's your mentality there?
Yeah, we were just excited to be able to play, I guess, some free football. So the pressure for us with the group that we had back then, it never really got to us. It was more of an opportunity for us to play some more football. So technically we only had 4 quarters, but in that instance, give credit to them. They made a play late at the game, and we went to overtime. Our philosophy was to try to score every single time we had the ball offensively and get stop defensively, and just ended up going back and forth for a while.
You always love pressure. You enjoy the bigger the moment, the happier you were. So was it just another play? Because there's points in those overtime periods where it's a 4th down play. You got to make a play to extend the game. Why do you think you were mentally built for overtime type play, sudden death type play like that?
Yeah, I just think the bigger the game, the group that we had. Back then, I think we all rose to the occasion. I think, sometimes looking back, maybe we played less talented teams. We kind of, went through the motions for a little bit, maybe early on in the game, and then, turned it on. But the bigger the competition, again, back then, we were, top 5, top 10 program every year. And we knew every Saturday we were going to get everybody's best shot, regardless of who we played. And I think the bigger the moment, whether it was at home or on the road, we had guys that set up and made plays. And that was really the key to, I think, the time that I was there it's all about making plays. If we made more plays, the team, odds enough we're going to win. If the other team made more plays than us, then they won. We shook their hands and got ready for next week. So college football, the NFL, even the high school level, it's all about guys making plays and stepping up in big moments during the game.
Before we get to the injury and the game winner to Jason, how much did that game in 2002, because of the 4th down conversions and the big plays in overtime, help prepare you for a year later when you had to go to 5 overtimes and complete a 4th and 19 at Alabama?
Yeah, I think the first time we went through it in overtime, obviously they changed the rules, I believe, maybe a couple of years before then, but we had practiced that, numerous times. I think, I don't know if it was Wednesday or Thursday, we'd always end practice with, overtimes, and either the offense would win or defense would win. So we were kind of used to doing it. Obviously, we were able to do it live against another team against Arkansas. But I think every time you do something more than once, it prepares you. And again, it's free football, bonus football, whatever you want to call it, not only for us, but for the fans. And I think as exciting as it was for the fans to watch, it was exciting for us as players to, be able to go out there and play some extra ball. So we enjoyed it.
Do you remember the play that you hurt the collarbone? Do you remember the hit? Do you remember where you were?
Yeah. Like it was yesterday. Yeah, it was I think early in the fourth, late in the third, and I think it was a third down play. And I got flushed out of the pocket and stepped up, and I think it was actually Brooks, the big defensive lineman, fell on me. And I knew right away when I fell that something was wrong, and so that's what it was.
I don't remember you going and spending a lot of time with trainers on the sideline after. I mean, like
I
nobody knew you were hurt.
Yeah, I try to stay away, and Jason McVay and Keith, who were the trainers at the time, we know each other pretty well, and they kind of know me and kind of how I operated. And they came over and said, "What's going on?" I said, "I think my shoulder's a little messed up." And so we tried to stay away because there was like cameras all behind our bench or whatever, and they had something, maybe a towel over it. He just felt underneath there. He said, "Yeah, it's broke." I said, "That's great." I said, "Anything we can do?" He said, "Not really." I said, "Okay," and that was pretty much it.
Did you you didn't put a pad on it or anything? Did you put an extra pad or anything on it, Casey? Did the trainers do anything?
I don't think at that time they had it made yet. They didn't have it. No, later on in the season when I attempted to come back, they created something for me, but they made me feel a little bit better, so it wouldn't hurt as bad, if you know what I mean. But I just pretty much had to go back out there and play, so that's what I did.
Did you ever think about coming out and not playing? Did you ever get to the point where during the game where you're like, I can't do this physically?
Not a chance. No, my teammates and everybody, again, we relied on each other, and there was a lot of guys banged up. That year going back, if you looked on paper, obviously 2001 was an unbelievable season. And we lost a lot. But if you back on it, before this season started, yes, we're going to be young on defense, but offensively, we're ready to roll in 2002. Dante was coming back. Then he declared that he wanted to come back. Then he couldn't come back. And that kind of snowballed everything. But on paper, 2002, especially offensively, we felt we were ready to roll. And just everything that could go wrong, injury-wise, losing guys before the season started. The first Constantine goes down. It was just a year where we were all glad it was over when it ended. But, we felt going into 2002. We're in 2001. We felt defensively we'd come along because we were really, really young. We signed Julian Battle, Demetrian Veal, Jabril Wilson we brought into the JUCO route. And just a tough year overall for everybody, and injuries obviously had a big part of it.
Take me through the game winner to Jason. Was he option number one there? And then, what were you seeing? Talk about the throw and when he caught it and crossed the goal line, how much just kind of relief, having played, the better part of basically a half, with that injury.
Yeah, it was a great call by Coach Sanders. We were in a twin set with a tight end to the backside, and we actually motioned the back out. And it was all go. And based upon if it was middle field open or middle field closed, either going to go to the slot guy, which I believe was Tony, or Jason was in the slot on the tight end side. And I knew the safety. We had it pre-snapped, and the ball was snapped. I knew I had him. I just didn't know if the ball was going to be able to get there, in time. It was going to be a touchdown or interception because that was, pre-snap where he told me to go there, and then I verified it, snapped the ball. But I knew Jason would catch it if I could get it to him. I don't know how, but it got to him, and that was a game winner. So a great catch by him.
How hard was it to throw the ball? Because, I mean, in the overtimes, you had a 25-yard touchdown pass to Tony Brown, and you had a 25-yard touchdown pass to Jason. So it wasn't like everything you were doing with the shoulder was just a dump off. I know it wasn't your throwing shoulder, but just in terms of driving the ball vertically, how painful was it to do that?
Yeah, the toughest part was just getting a snap because my off hand, which is my bottom hand, was my left. And every time the ball got snapped, obviously I would feel it. And the adrenaline helped a little bit, obviously. But, you got to do what you got to do to help out your teammates. Again, they would do the same thing if it was for me, and I did the same thing for them. So football is a physical sport. You got to be mentally tough as well as, physically tough. And, obviously it hurt. But the win was obviously, I think, a big win for us at the time. But I think reality kicked in as I was walking off the field, especially once I got into the locker room, the training room. They took me straight in there, and I think that's when kind of reality, kicked in on I think, what was to come for the rest of the year for me.
And I know
you never know what what event will kind of set in course a chain of events. But you get hurt means you don't get a chance to beat Georgia the next week. I think as Brent, we talked about this beforehand, the only team in the conference you didn't beat during your time here, and then of course set in motion the disgruntled CJ Leak, and Chris ends up going to Florida. I mean, it was a cool moment, but I know that the effects afterwards were well felt, right?
Yeah, it was a tough. Again, I go back to the beginning of the season, preseason. Even obviously things worked out tremendously for Dante, and losing Big John and Albert and Overstreet, we felt, especially offensively, that we're gonna have a really good team. Defensively, we're young, but just everything that could go wrong for such a high level team on paper preseason wise and where we were kind of projected. The East was kind of down that year, I believe. And we had some really good talented guys coming back. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong that year. And somehow we managed to get through it. But it was a tough year, not only for us as players, but I'm sure it was a tough year for the fans, watching it, especially after the year we had, in 2001. But I'm really proud of all my teammates and my guys for sticking it out. And no matter what the circumstance was, every Saturday we're going to go out and compete. And whoever we were playing, they're going to get our best shot. And I think that's what I'm most proud of.
My last question for you about this game, Casey. My lasting image, two things. One, I remember doing a talk show on Sunday morning, and somebody called in and was trying to be critical of your play. And I was like, you guys haven't – and I knew what was coming. I knew the shoulder was hurt. But it was really interesting. If you were a fan and even your teammates, if you did not look at your reaction after the Witten touchdown, then you really wouldn't know that you were hurt, because you had not shown, like, even your teammates, because they were going to come up to mob you. And I remember that image of you're like, hey, don't touch me, like, get away. And that's when I knew right then that you were really hurt. It was funny. Just the trainers knew. Nobody else really knew what was going on. Did Coach Sanders even know how bad you were?
I think he might have had an idea, but Jason came up and said, "What's up?" I said, "I think he's busted." He goes, "Yeah, I'm not feeling too hot anyways." And he got popped like midway through the third overtime or fourth overtime. He didn't know where he was either. So to really put the cherry on top, I'm out there with one arm. He got busted pretty good. And he's trying to figure out, where am I? So we both had to gut it out, but that's just kind of what we do. I remember after the touchdown, Dustin comes running out, Colquitt, to like high-five me, and I kind of almost jumped like midair to protect my left shoulder. And he looked at me and he's like, "You all right?" I was like, "Yeah, I think we'll see." And so I think that was kind of the first, I guess, glimpse when people my teammates knew something was going on. But for the most part, what are you going to do? You got to go out there and gut it up and do the best you can for your team and your teammates.
So all these years later, you just mentioned two guys that are still playing in the NFL, Dustin Colquitt, Jason Witten.
Yep.
Jason obviously just signed with the Raiders, which isn't too far from where you're at. So do you get a chance to catch up with those guys much? And have you been able to go watch any of those guys play over the years?
I haven't talked to Dustin in a while. Jason and I probably talk probably once every in season or off season, and I couldn't be more proud of those guys and what they're doing. I think they're doing an unbelievable job. Jason's going to go down as one of the greatest tight ends to ever play. Dustin, probably one of the greatest punters to ever play. And I think that was the coolest thing about playing ball at Tennessee at that time is you had Tennessee kids, California kids, Hawaii kids, Georgia, Florida, Texas. Like, we were a national brand, and Coach Fulmer and then the assistant coaches back then did an unbelievable job of going coast to coast to recruit the best kids. And it was a family. And, we always had each other back. And still to this day, Tennessee's playing on Saturday, do everything I can to watch them, or TiVo. And then obviously when my guys are still playing on Sundays, I get to watch them on Sunday. So I could be more happy of those guys and proud of them and representing the Vol Nation as best as they have been.
Well, Casey, it wasn't the most memorable game maybe in Tennessee history, but it was certainly a fascinating 6 overtime period that really changed the course of things, and obviously your gutsiest performance at Tennessee with playing through the injury. We appreciate you taking the time to join us on this edition of our Rocky Top Rewind of the VolQuest podcast, brought to you by Blue Water Climate Control.
Thanks a lot, guys.